Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new, my name's Ariella. I'm a first year medical student and I make videos about medical school education and lifestyle. I'm a little bit sick, as you can probably tell, so please forgive me if my voice sounds a little scratchy, but I'm gonna try my best. It usually gets better as I talk more, so hopefully that improves. Today is, I'm not actually sure what day it is. I'm gonna add the date here, but it is officially my spring break. I just finished exams last week. Good morning, guys. We are almost done with finals week. I only have 2 tests left, one today and one tomorrow. The test that I have today is our big anatomy written exam. I will talk a little bit more about the exams later, and for now, I'm gonna head to school. Because we're on a trimester schedule, we get a 1-week break in between each trimester, which is really nice. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about my study process and how I prepared for finals week, because I know a lot of people are interested on how finals week in medical school works and how you manage all the information that you're expected to reproduce. Before we start, hi Courtney, if you're watching this. If you're not watching this, I don't blame you because I don't want to relive my finals week, but a couple things to get out of the way in the beginning is that every medical school is different, so every school has a different curriculum style and a different setup. Not all med schools are on trimesters, that just so happens to be what my school is on. So if you are a first year medical student or you're a pre-med student and you find that when you go to medical school your schedule is different, that is a possibility. So just keep that in mind. So the second thing that I want to say is I have a mixture of different exams. So some of the exams are cumulative over the entire semester, but then some exams are only like the final exam in a group of 4 exams for that subject. I'll get into that a little bit later, but I just wanted to make it clear that not all of my exams are cumulative, only some of them are. I had 1 exam per day for the entire week of finals week. Some were larger than others. So starting out on Monday, we had about an 80 question written OMM exam. So the way OMM works is that you have a lecture portion and you have a lab portion. The lab portion is tested via practical exams in the OMM lab, where you demonstrate that you know how to do these skills on another student or a patient. That was before finals week, so I didn't even have to think about that. But in addition to lab, we also have OMM lecture. We usually have between 10 and 15 lectures per trimester, and we have a midterm and a final. The midterm is only for the information that we've learned at the beginning of that trimester, and the final is cumulative with information from the midterm as well as any lectures we had afterward. So like I said, that was about an 80 question cumulative exam for OMM, where we had to learn a ton of different things. Luckily for OMM, a lot of the information is very repetitive in that it works really well with anatomy. So for example, we had a lecture on autonomics, which we discussed when we were doing our neuro portion of anatomy anyway. So they tend to coincide very well. But there are some things for OMM that you need to just straight up memorize. For example, your sympathetic levels. You need to know which level of the spinal cord matches up to which body part you're trying to affect. And so that's something that's on a chart that I can show here, and you basically just need to memorize that chart and know exactly which levels correspond to which body parts. So the way that I study for OMM exam is usually a week or 2 before the exam. I will make a Quizlet and I will put as many questions on that Quizlet that I think are important for the exam from the lecture slides as I can possibly learn. And I will learn that Quizlet over the course of the 2 or 1 week leading up to the exam. And then the weekend before the exam, that's when I'll go ahead and memorize those charts, where things that don't really take a lot of comprehension, they're just memorization, I will save for the weekend before the exam, because that's just what works for me. Keep in mind that if you want something to stay in your brain for long-term retention, you're gonna need to keep up on that information. So learning the information right before the exam is a good way to get those questions right, but If you asked me now, I probably would not be able to reproduce what spinal levels correspond to what part of the body because I stored that in my short-term memory for the exam, and I would need to continue reviewing that in order to prepare for boards, which is something where you need to use long-term retention. So the second exam I had was a histology practical, and I've talked a lot about what I do for histology previously on this channel, but just to reiterate, what happens is we are given a histology lab manual. At the end of each chapter of the lab manual, there's a list of terms that we can potentially be tested on. So we need to be able to recognize those terms on a histological slide. So what I do is I use HistoTime. It is the best $10 I've ever spent, specifically because it gives you a large volume of images, which is something that I think is really hard to find. There are tons of amazing histology resources out there that you can get for free, but they usually have a small volume of slides to look at. So I think that looking at a bunch of different slides is a great way to learn histology, because then you can't be surprised when you see something that's maybe less familiar to you. There's also another website that I will link down below that is very useful for lookalikes. I can't remember the exact name of the website right now, but I recommend that for looking at histological images that look very similar. Sometimes things can look similar in your mind when you think about the characteristics, but when you put them next to each other, they don't actually look that similar. So that's what I would recommend for histology, using Histology Time plus whatever resources your school gives you, plus the Lookalikes website. And once that website is filled out with more things, I think it's going to be really good. And then any additional free resources that you can find online. Because you'll find that it sounds like a lot, but with histology, you run out of resources faster than you learn. Moving on to Wednesday. Wednesday was my anatomy practical. And again, I've talked a little bit about my personal struggle with anatomy in the past. I found that in general, like looking back on my performance, I tend to do better on the practical exams. I don't really have a good reason why. I think it's because in general, I'm kind of artistic by nature, and so being able to experience these structures in a three-dimensional world kind of helps me, well, it helps me learn, and it also helps me figure out the right answer. So a lot of the times I can just trace whatever the structure is to where it comes from and where it's going, and I know exactly what it is. For example, on the last practical, we had a fold called the paladoglossus fold, which is just like a flap of skin that holds the paladoglossus muscle in it. And the only reason I knew what it was because when you're looking at the pharynx, everything just kind of looks like tissue. So the only reason I knew what it was is because I traced it from the palate to the tongue, glossus, tongue, paladoglossus. So that tends to be my strong suit in anatomy, is the practical exam, but I did improve my studying a little bit this time by going to the anatomy lab more often for shorter bouts of time. So let's talk about my previous practical experience. I was in the labs for dissections, but I didn't go up to lab at all to review the information before like the 3 to 4 days leading up to the exam. And those 3 to 4 days, I spent probably 5 hours per day in lab. And that worked out pretty well. I got a good grade, but I definitely was struggling because of it. And being up in lab for a long period of time wasn't really good for me because it would irritate my asthma, it would make me sick, it would give me eczema, all effects of the formaldehyde that, you know, I can't really help, but it was important for me to learn that information. So this time around, I went up at least once, if not twice per week, separate from our dissections in order to review the information as I went. And that really helped to solidify some of the things into my brain. And then again, the 3 to 4 days leading up to the exam, I probably spent about 3 hours in lab. As you can probably tell, my respiratory system is not very happy with me because of it, but it was definitely worth it. And at the end of the day, in order to perform well on practicals, you need to spend time in the lab. The more time you spend up there, the better off you will be. Okay, so let's talk about the written exam. So the written exam for anatomy tended to be where I struggled if I did well on the practical. Written anatomy exams are pretty tough, and that's because they're entirely first order questions, and so if you don't know the exact fact that they're asking for, that's kind of an automatic 0 for you on that question, unless you get lucky and you happen to pick the right multiple choice answer. So what I did this time around that I wasn't doing before is I really stayed on top of the note cards. I did my Anki cards every single day, and that really helped, again, to solidify things into my long-term memory. Basically, my process for anatomy lecture was the Sunday before class, I would go through whatever lectures were available on Blackboard, and I would make Anki decks based on the lectures that we were given. So a lot of the times I would use image occlusion, and I would cover up labels of pictures that we were given, so that way I knew what structures I would need to be able to recognize. It would probably be a little bit better to use actual cadaver, like labeled cadaver images in order to do this, but it worked by just using the PowerPoints, so, you know, whatever you prefer. If you use cadaver images, that'll probably help a little bit more for the practical because you'll be used to seeing what it actually looks like on a cadaver. But I would make those. I would go into lecture having already seen this information when I made my Anki decks, so that was a big plus. I would add any additional information that the professor talked about that either wasn't on the slides or they had updated the slides before I made the deck or after I made the deck, or anything that they stressed in particular. Like, for example, one of my professors said that the most important ligament of the TMJ is the sphenomandibular ligament. So in my brain, I think, okay, if he's gonna ask us a question, it's most likely going to be about the most important ligament of the TMJ. So I wrote an Anki card that said, what is the fulcrum of the TMJ? And the answer is sphenomandibular, and I never forgot that. It's an example of something that I would add afterward, because on the lecture slide, he just had a picture of the TMJ with all of the ligaments attached. That's kind of honestly all I did, except I would make summary sheets for development because I think having a more linear process for development is a little bit easier to understand. I said linear. And then based on what I was getting wrong in my Anki cards, I would review what I was weak on, and that was totally fine. I have my exam results back and I did great. So I think the biggest thing to take away is staying on top of your note cards in anatomy is going to be the best way for you to be successful. So that leaves us with Friday, and Friday is my cumulative end of trimester exam. And here's where I have to admit that I've been spending so much time focusing on anatomy that I definitely neglected this portion of my finals week. This exam is designed to see how good your long-term retention is. So we had questions from anatomy, but we had an equal number of questions from our previous semester, which was like cellular, biochemistry, immunology, cancer biology, those types of questions. And so it's designed to see how much you're retaining from previous semesters and from the beginning of the semester that you're currently in. The idea is that you want to continue doing Anki reviews so that your long-term retention is good and you're reviewing high-yield topics that are relevant for boards. The nice thing about this exam is it is pass-fail, so as long as you get above a certain percentage, you pass the exam, and that doesn't go into your GPA. Full disclosure, for this exam, I did absolutely no studying outside of the studying that I was already doing for anatomy. And I passed, which is really good, but I do think that there's definitely some ways to incorporate some review in the future. So one of the things that I want to do is either create an Anki deck or find an Anki deck with questions that are relevant to high-yield board topics. If you have recommendations for those, leave them down below. I want something that's kind of manageable on top of the schedule that I already have, and I feel like if you try to jump right into it, I'm not sure if it's gonna work, but we're gonna try it and see. And I think just doing as many reviews as I can per day will help to keep this information fresh in my brain. The nice thing about anatomy is that it isn't extremely board relevant, so there are a few really important topics from anatomy that you need to know, but other than that, it's definitely a smaller volume compared to all the other courses that I'm going to be taking. Yeah, in the future, I just want to improve my performance on that exam by continually reviewing old topics. I did like 25 COMLEX style questions every day except for weeks that I had exams. And that definitely helped because I don't know if I would have passed if I hadn't been doing that. However, I think The shift should be more toward note card review on the weekly basis, and then on the weekend do a larger chunk of COMLEX style questions, like 50 or 100 questions. The only problem with that is obviously I was using time on the weekends to study anatomy, and doing 100 COMLEX questions and taking the time to actually do them, review them, make sure I understand why I got the ones wrong that I did, that takes time. And so I don't know how it's going to be this next semester when I am in cardio, renal, and pulmonary medicine. Hopefully I'll be able to manage that, but if not, the COMLEX questions I think are less useful right now because I'm not actively studying for boards. Yeah, those are my thoughts. I had a really great finals week this time around. I wasn't too stressed, which was awesome. I think over the years I've definitely learned how to manage my stress pretty well, and so if you guys would be interested in a video on how to manage your stress, I'd be down to make that, although I think my tips are pretty generic in that there are lots of other videos out there and lots of people more qualified than I am to tell you how to manage your stress levels, but I think that's all I wanted to say. So if you guys enjoyed this, please give it a thumbs up, and if you want to stick around, please subscribe, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye-bye.